perspective, I don't think there is actually an answer to the question, are they paid too much? I think what there is, and if you look at some of the recent pronouncements coming out of the Investment Association and its Executive Remuneration Working Group and the Business Select Committee, which has just started looking into the question of corporate governance and executive pay, the one theme that runs through both is that there is a considerable lack of transparency around executive pay. And it's very easy to ascertain what people are paid and what they're entitled to in terms of their base salary, and particularly in a quoted company, that appears in your report and accounts and in your remuneration report. Once you move into the areas of long-term incentives and the like, it becomes much more difficult to work out exactly what people will be receiving because they are subject to performance criteria. LTIPs tend to be fairly specific on what those criteria are and well publicised. When you move into bonuses or short-term variable pay, then you get into some interesting areas around what discretion remuneration committees can exercise, how they exercise that discretion, and exactly what the performance criteria may be, because some of that may be price-sensitive information which isn't readily disclosed or available. Even trying to benchmark between sectors, private, public, different sectors, is very difficult to do, and therefore I don't actually think that you can come to an answer as to whether executives are paid too much, and that's not sitting on the fence, it just happens to be my view.
So on the plus side, since 2013, there's been far more control in place, particularly as concerns bonuses. EU regulations have prevented banks giving bonuses greater than 100% of base salaries, and I'd argue that there's been more and improved transparency as the government and filthy media types such as myself have questioned who is being awarded what. What employers must now do is to ensure that they understand all the regulations and policies, and also look beyond pay as well to ensure that the benefits that they have in place are used to their maximum impact, to ensure that you've got a fair workforce that gets the most out of their paycheck each month, and that should be applicable to your CEOs, to your exec board, but also, as I say, to your newest intake, right down to the very bottom level.
When we look at executive reward, it leads into so many things. We've touched on gender pay. You can touch on the minimum wage legislation, everything. It can be all things to all people. So with that in mind, when I was sort of working on this the other day, I rewrote what I did, and I thought I'd just look at it a different way and say, why are we not solving this issue? And there's sometimes a problem, and why is it a problem? And I thought, well, we're all HR people. I think we would all have a problem at work. We would look at it commercially, and we would try and define the problem. And I suspect if I went round the room and asked what is the issue with pay, we might get very different answers. There isn't a consensus of what the issue is. And the fact that we don't use, or rarely use, not don't, but rarely use evidence to actually design the problem, I think is also a concern. It's often an emotional one. For me, it's probably jealousy when I see some of the numbers that are compared to the other side of the table.
Because a lot of our views on exec comp are essentially based on reportage of the top performers in the FTSE 100 every year. And I know that I'm speaking to an educated audience, so forgive me for teaching you to suck eggs, but the FTSE 100 is a bit like the Premiership of football, in that teams get relegated and promoted every year. So by just focusing on the real high performers each year and picking out those that have scored the most goals, you're not getting a consistent picture of how every team has performed, and when we talk about CEOs' pay, how every CEO has been paid. So very often, commentary, and the BBC love this, and they're very lazy about it, I think. They pick out particularly high-performing organisations who pay very high LTIPs, and they sort of scream massive headlines about how much an individual may have earned. But they ignore the fact that at the same time, a number of organisations have dropped out of that size, which means that they haven't hit their plans, which means that their executives have received no bonus, or in fact have got fired.
Questions from the floor.
The amount of money, say, an extra £100,000 a year, is going to make a massive amount of difference to my quality of life. If I'm getting paid, say, £500,000 anyway, what difference does £100,000 make to my life, which is already incredibly comfortable anyway? And in that way, if they can't improve my life, how does it work as an incentive apart from numbers on a balance sheet?
The more you go up the scale, the less money is a motivator, but my experience, the more it is a demotivator, particularly in terms of bonuses and particularly within particular industries and sectors, because it's almost not about the money that you're being paid, it's about how much you're being paid compared with another person. It becomes far more of a competitive factor.
If the gender balance was better in senior management, would that not automatically lower executive pay?
I've been talking about this and writing about this for so long, and I'm so bored with the fact that people are still not paid the same because they are people, they're just of different genders. I would like to think that women could earn the same as men without men having to be brought down to the level of women.
When more executives are at the top scale and they're in line with the salary banding, but they're performing very well, do you say no to more remuneration, or should you keep rewarding them in terms of salary because they're doing so well? At what point should you say, I'll really do any more for you?
Executive director salaries aren't changing and haven't really changed a lot in the last few years, partly for the reasons outlined. It's not the biggest part of their comp when they fill their boots. There are other things, and so when you see the numbers of the 4.7 or the 5.6, depending what you believe, on what the average chief exec gets paid, a small amount of that is salary. And generally salary, as was mentioned, is not performance related. You kind of get it, and if your performance isn't up to it, you tend to go.
That at this point, post-recession public funds have been used to the degree that I think, whether it's a shareholder vote or not, people will still want to know, and I think people still have absolutely the right to know. But I agree that there can be too much of the element of headline grabbing with some specific industries, which is precisely why I said at the beginning, you've got to differentiate between executive and CEO pay and the bankers' bonuses that we heard so much about. And I mean, I agree with Deborah when she says it's like picking out what you want to relate, because there's always a good headline in talking about someone being paid a huge bonus. In recent years, there have been a few people who have actually given that bonus back or refused it, and that's not necessarily brought up either. So I think, we definitely do have to put that information out there, because I think whether it's shareholder or not, it's still, the public's right to know, but I think it needs to be more balanced and evidence-based.
I hope you've had as much fun as me in terms of tonight's debate, and thank you for coming, and thank you again for the panel.